Online privacy. Let's talk about it. For as it turns out, it's quite the rabbit hole and I'm in deep. But what do people actually mean when they say online privacy? Well, if we first remove the online part, I'm sure everyone has an idea, right? Why do we close the door when we go to the bathroom? Why don't we tell the cashier about our constipation problems? And why can it feel awkward to overshare to a coworker? Because we want certain information to remain private, not accessible to everyone. We only share intimate information with those that are closest to us. So privacy is about not sharing certain information with certain people, not keeping it totally secret, but keeping a section of people out. Good, let's add the online part again. This is a bit more complicated because if we want to be dramatic about it, you share a lot of information, data, without even thinking about it. We don't think about closing the bathroom door online, so to speak. When we navigate the vast internet, we leave a digital breadcrumb trail. Every click, search, product you buy, SoMe profile you create, videos you watch, comments you leave, it all adds up. And that data doesn't just disappear. No, it's sold, and often to the highest bidder. It gets collected, stored, and sold. And these detailed profiles of you and your habits are very valuable to these massive corporations. And governments, I guess. Because the more they know about you, the more they can predict your behavior, influence what you see, and ultimately make money. Think of the saying, if it's free, you are the product. Now, as dramatic as that sounds, it's not entirely wrong. Take something like Instagram or Facebook. You're not paying to use them, but they're still some of the most profitable companies in the whole world. Why? Well, it's because they're real customers aren't you and I, it's advertisers. We are the product. These platforms collect data about what you like, what you click on, how long you look at something, and use that to show you highly targeted ads. And yes, I see the irony that I'm speaking to you here on YouTube. Anyway, so your attention, your behavior, your data, that is what's being packaged and sold. I don't love that. So far, we've been conceptualizing privacy as keeping information, well, private. And if we think about it this way, a natural question rises. What the hell can we do about it? That's what we're going to talk about today, and I'm also going to share my experiences and I guess more importantly my mistakes. Before I show you the iceberg, however, we need to talk about threat models, which sounds complicated, but it's basically just asking, what do I want to protect and from who? Obviously, we don't want our passwords compromised, our accounts hacked, or identity stolen. That's pretty much a given, but what I'm most concerned about is keeping my data out of the hands of big tech that profit from it. Now, into the iceberg. The point isn't to go all the way down to the bottom. Even a few small changes can improve your privacy a lot. The surface. Here we have the more obvious stuff, but again, these alone can make a big difference, and they're relatively easy to implement, starting with your browser. I'm guessing a lot of you use Chrome, and that's not great. Switching to a browser like Brave, Firefox, DuckDuckGo, or Zen is already a great step. Brave, for example, blocks ads and third-party trackers by default, so instead of websites loading a bunch of tracking scripts and cookies in the background, a lot of that just gets stopped before it even runs. It also tries to protect against things like browser fingerprinting, where your device can be identified based on things like your screen size, fonts, and system setup. So overall, you're exposing a lot less information while browsing compared to Chrome, where most of that tracking is allowed unless you install a few extensions. I use Zen because I find Brave to be a bit bloated. I don't really like the crypto and AI features that they've added. Zen is actually a fork of Firefox, which basically means it's built on top of Firefox, but modified with a different goal. In this case, a more minimal and privacy-focused experience. Still, you can't really go wrong with any of the options that I mentioned, and if you want to go more in depth, you can check out this website. They compare popular browsers pretty thoroughly, so you can see how they stack up. Next up, an ad blocker. A lot of ads are actually just trackers running in the background. Something like uBlock Origin just blocks that entirely. Now, whether that's ethical is up to you. Some people would call it piracy. I don't know. Password managers. I'll be honest, I used the same 2 passwords for everything up until quite recently. But if you're reusing the same ones across multiple sites, that's kind of a problem. Because if one of those sites gets breached, that password can be used to access everything else. It's basically one key to all the doors in your house. That's why using a password manager is a big step here. It basically generates and stores very long and random passwords for you, so you don't have to remember anything. So instead of one password, one key for everything, you have a unique one for every single account. There are a lot of good options out there. Bitwarden is a popular one, KeePass if you want something more local, and 1Password as well. I personally use ProtonPass, mainly because it was just very easy to set up and it just works across all of my devices. Now, on top of a password manager, you can also enable something called two-factor authentication, which basically means that even if someone gets your password, they still need a second code to log in, usually from an app on your phone, so even if your password gets leaked somewhere, it's not enough on its own. One last thing here at the surface, a proper cleanup. Just cleaning up your digital footprint a bit. So deleting all the accounts you don't use anymore, removing apps you don't need, and going through basic privacy settings once in a while. Things like turning your Instagram account to be private, limiting what apps have access to your location, microphone and camera, or just turning off tracking where you can. And again, this is all pretty low effort, but it will make a noticeable difference. Okay, before we descend further, there's kind of a trade-off here. As you go deeper into this iceberg, your privacy goes up, but so does the effort that it takes to maintain it. And at the same time, convenience usually goes down as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that the tools themselves are worse to use. Most of the time, the inconvenience is really just in switching, setting things up and getting used to something new. Because once you actually make the switch, a lot of these tools work pretty much the same as what you were using before. So the deeper you go, the more you're trading initial convenience for long-term control. Starting with something simple, search. Instead of using Google for everything, you can switch to something like DuckDuckGo, Startpage or Brave Search. Startpage, for example, calls itself the world's most private search engine, which kind of tells you what the focus is there. They still give you search results, but without building a detailed profile of everything you look up. With Google, your searches are often tied to your account, your history and your location. All of that gets used to personalize results and ads, whereas alternatives like DuckDuckGo or Brave Search don't store your search history or try to track you across the web. So again, it's the same idea as before, it's the same internet, just a bit less of your data being collected as you roam around. Communication. So for messaging, you might use something like Signal or Telegram instead of Messenger or just regular SMS. Most mainstream messaging apps don't actually encrypt your messages in a way that prevents the company from accessing them, or at least collecting metadata about who you talk to and when. Signal, for example, on the other hand, uses end-to-end encryption by default, which means only you and the person you're talking to can actually read the messages. Not even Signal can access them. So you're still texting like normal, sending photos, voice messages, all of that, but with a lot less of your communication being exposed in the background. This one is a bit more inconvenient though, because unlike switching your browser or search engine, it kind of depends on other people. For it to really work, you have to convince the people you talk to switch as well. I've certainly not succeeded at that, and I probably won't. Oh well. Now, instead of Outlook or Gmail or Yahoo, if that's still a thing, you might use a service like ProtonMail, Tutor or Mailbox. They're all built around the idea of not scanning your emails or using them for advertising, and in many cases they offer end-to-end encryption as well. Again, this one might be a bit difficult, at least initially. I use ProtonMail for my YouTube business, which was very easy because I started out with Proton. But migrating from your current email might take a bit more effort. Luckily, many of these privacy email have these migration helpers, but again, you still have to put in a bit of effort. What's great here though is that you can still receive and send emails from people who use Outlook or Gmail. Then there's the network itself. Every time you connect to the internet, your traffic goes through your internet service provider, ISP, and websites can see your IP address, which can roughly tell them where you're located. A VPN, which stands for Virtual Private Network, network basically routes your traffic through a different server. So instead of your real IP, websites see the IP of that server. So you're just adding a bit of separation between you and the sites that you visit. There are a lot of options here. Proton VPN, Molvad, and iVPN are usually mentioned as more privacy-focused choices. But VPNs are not some kind of silver bullet. You're still trusting the VPN provider instead of your ISP, so it's more about shifting trust rather than removing it completely. I highly recommend watching these two videos because, as it turns out, all VPN companies are not made equal. Yet I do use a VPN. Proton VPN, which is today's sponsor. I've been using it for the past 6 months, so when they reached out, it just made sense. I already told you how VPNs work, so why Proton specifically? For me, it's mainly two things. First, it's fully open source, which basically means anyone can go in and look at the code. And that matters because it means the service can actually be independently verified. You're not just taking their word for it. Second is their no logs policy, which basically means they don't keep records of what you're doing online. And that matters too, because when you use a VPN, you're shifting trust from your ISP to the VPN provider. So the whole point is that they're not storing that data in the first place. It also has a built-in blocker for ads and trackers, which just removes a lot of that background noise while you're browsing. And it's just very easy to use. One click and you're connected on all devices. So yeah, not a silver bullet, just one tool in the stack. If you want to try it out, you can use my link protonvpn.com/foci. Thanks to ProtonVPN for supporting the channel. Now, let's continue the descent. Deep waters. Okay, this is where things start to change a bit more fundamentally, I suppose we could say. Because up until now, you've mostly just been switching out the tools you use, and that wasn't all that difficult. But now a bit more effort is required. One step in that direction is actually switching out your operating system. Instead of using Windows or Mac, you could switch to Linux. Linux, in simple terms, just gives you a lot more control over what your system is doing. It's open source, generally has less tracking built in, and you're not as tied into a big ecosystem in that way. I could talk for hours about Linux, but instead you should just consider checking out my Linux videos. And on the mobile side, you can take a similar approach. So instead of using iOS and Android, you might use something like GrapheneOS, which removes a lot of the built-in tracking and gives you more control over your phone. It's also at this point you should consider switching out mainstream apps and services with open source options. So for example, using LibreOffice or OnlyOffice instead of the Microsoft suite. Again, I have dedicated videos about this, but I must say my experience is that open source alternatives are often just as good as more proprietary options. Oh, and most of them are free, so yeah. And then you can take it even further. Enter self-hosting. Instead of relying on some company's servers, you run the service yourself on your own hardware. So instead of your data living on someone else's computers, because remember, servers are just computers, it lives on yours. That's really the key idea here. You're not choosing a more privacy-oriented option. You're essentially removing the middleman entirely. I'm quite deep in this self-hosting stuff at the moment. I've been setting up a small home lab, setting up Proxmox, and running things like Pi-hole on an old netbook. The home lab, which is just a bunch of computers, is what runs these self-hosted apps. I'm still very much a beginner when it comes to all of this, but I'm having a lot of fun. Nonetheless, here are the steps you typically start taking at this level. First, moving away from big cloud services. So instead of using something like Google Drive or iCloud, you might set up your own cloud storage at home, something like a NAS, and self-hosted solutions like Nextcloud or TrueNAS, where your files live on your own hardware instead of on someone else's servers, computers. Then there's your network. Instead of relying on external DNS providers, you can run something like Pi-hole, which blocks ads across your entire network, or Unbound, which lets you resolve DNS queries yourself instead of sending them to companies like Google or your ISP, Internet Service Provider. And more generally, you start replacing mainstream apps with open source alternatives, but I must warn you, it's quite the rabbit hole. And none of this, of course, is strictly necessary, but it's at this point where you move from just using more privacy-oriented tools and services to actually reclaiming and owning parts of your digital life, which is very cool. And then there's the bottom, let's get a bit weird here, because at this point it's not really about using privacy-oriented tools anymore. It's about trying to separate who you are from what you do online. Christ. So instead of just switching browsers, you might use something like Tor, which routes your traffic through multiple layers, so it's much harder to trace. You might use operating systems like Tails or QBs, which are designed specifically for privacy and isolation. And then you start thinking a bit more carefully about your identity, using different emails, different accounts, maybe even different versions of yourself, depending on what you're doing, and making sure that they don't connect. I've screwed up here already. See, I ran this little experiment. So first I googled my full name. There's my employment at my uni, another teaching job, a museum exhibition that I curated, and a conference that I attended. And that was kinda expected. I don't mind this. As a budding academic, I want my future employees to look me up and see what I've done. But then there's this YouTube channel. When I made it, I wanted it to remain separate from my profession and career. I've never disclosed my full name here, nor what university I work at. But throughout my videos, I've sometimes intentionally and sometimes by mistake revealed what my first name is, which city I live in, and that I study and work at a university. Now, on a new device using these 3 pieces of information, I found my teacher page at my uni. Now you have my full name, so now it's easy to find something like my private Instagram and Facebook profile. So much for separating my YouTube. Anyway, the bottom. Even things like payments change. So instead of just using your normal card, you might use cash, prepaid cards, or privacy-focused cryptocurrencies. And at that point, you're not really using the internet in the same way anymore. But it's interesting to see how far you can go, right? And somewhere along the way, it stops being about being more private and starts becoming a completely different approach to being online. You want anonymity. And I guess the very bottom here is just to move to a cabin in the woods and call it a day. Whoa. Okay, that was the online privacy iceberg, according to me. By the way, how did I do? Now I want to clarify that I don't have a background in cybersecurity or anything like that. I'm a total beginner, so, I'm not claiming to be an expert. I'll link below to some of the useful websites that I've learned a bunch from. But if you have any good advice or suggestions, please leave a comment. I'd be happy to read through them. If you made it this far, thank you. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to Justin, Kel, Efraris, Jan, Lester and Dustin, as well as the other members of the channel. You too can become a member of the channel if it's financially responsible of you. Right now there are 2 tiers with different perks, but in addition to these, all members are invited to join a VIP channel in the Discord. And again, thanks to Proton for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can check out Proton VPN by using my link protonvpn.com/foci. Okay, bye!